5 tons of gold, a canyon that swallows people whole, and a partner who smiles while hiding a knife. In the unforgiving heat of West Texas, human logic isn't enough to survive. When the enemy is standing right beside you, only one member of the team can smell the betrayal coming: Wolf, the 7-year-old shepherd who never forgets a scent. The midday sun hung heavy over the dusty outskirts of El Paso, Texas, baking the cracked asphalt of the lonely service station. Inside the open garage bay, Jake wiped grease from his hands with a stained rag. At 44, the years of running and fighting had carved deeper lines into his weathered face. His salt and pepper hair was shorter now, and he moved with the stiff, deliberate caution of a man who knew his joints would ache when the rain came. Sitting on a crate in the shade was his son, Leo. At 17, Leo had stretched out into a tall, lean young man. He wore a dark t-shirt and jeans, his attention entirely focused on the rugged laptop balanced on his knees. Beside him lay Wolf, their German shepherd. The dog was 7 years old now. His muzzle was flecked with white, but his dark gray and sable coat was still thick, and his amber eyes remained sharp and watchful. He lay with a calm, regal stillness, conserving his energy in the heat. The quiet rhythm of their afternoon was shattered by the high-pitched screech of tires on gravel. A battered sedan swerved violently off the main highway, crashing through the wooden perimeter fence before slamming into a concrete pylon near the fuel pumps. Steam hissed angrily from the crumpled hood. Jake was moving before the engine died. He grabbed a crowbar, signaling for Leo to stay back. Wolf was instantly at Jake's side, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. When Jake pulled the driver's door open, a metallic smell of copper and gasoline hit him. The driver was a man they had never seen, his shirt soaked in dark, spreading stains. The bullet holes in the car door told the story. The stranger gasped, his hand shooting out to grab the nearest thing, which happened to be Leo, who had disregarded his father's order and rushed to help. "Take it," the man wheezed, shoving a heavy, sealed brass tube into Leo's hands. Leo looked at the object, stunned. "Who did this to you?" "Do not let the one-legged man have it," the stranger rasped, his eyes wide with panic. "Diablo Canyon, it is all there." With a final rattling breath, the stranger slumped against the steering wheel. He was gone. Jake pulled Leo back, his eyes scanning the horizon for pursuers. The road was empty. He ushered his son and the dog into the back office of the garage and locked the door. Leo placed the brass tube on the workbench. He used a torch to melt the wax seal. Inside, rolled tight, was a piece of brittle, tanned leather. He spread it out. It was a map, drawn in fading ink, dated 1865. "It is a map to a Confederate gold cache," Leo whispered, tracing the faded lines. "But these landmarks are gone. The Twin Oaks, the Dry Creek. They do not exist anymore." Jake looked at the useless drawing. "Then it is worthless. We should bury it with him." "No," Leo said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. He initiated a geological scanning program he had been developing. He scanned the leather map and overlaid it onto a modern 3D satellite topographic map of the Big Bend region. The computer whirred, processing the erosion patterns of the last century. A match clicked onto the screen. "The entrance collapsed decades ago," Leo said, pointing to a specific set of coordinates on the screen. "It is buried under tons of rock. A normal map would lead you nowhere. You need the digital terrain analysis to find the exact dig point." Leo looked up at his father, his expression serious. "This data is the only way in. It is not just a map, Dad. It is our insurance." The coordinates Leo had extracted pointed to a location deep within the Diablo Mountains, a rugged, unforgiving stretch of private land that was fenced off and patrolled like a fortress. Jake knew they could not just drive their beat-up truck into that terrain. They needed armor, they needed clearance, and they needed heavy equipment. They drove 2 hours east to the sprawling gates of the Sterling Ranch. The owner, Cyrus Sterling, was a legend in West Texas. He was a land developer whose empire stretched across the border, though rumors whispered that his fortunes were drying up. They met him in a massive, trophy-filled study that smelled of leather and expensive cigars. Sterling rose from behind a mahogany desk to greet them. He was a large man, 50 years old, with a barrel chest and a face that looked carved from granite. His most striking feature, however, was not his smile, but his walk. He moved with a heavy, rhythmic gait. His left leg was missing from the knee down, replaced by a gleaming, skeletal structure of titanium and hydraulic pistons. Wolf, who had been heeling calmly beside Jake, suddenly stiffened. The 7-year-old dog let out a low, rumbling growl, his amber eyes locked onto the metal leg. "Quiet, Wolf," Jake commanded, placing a hand on the dog's neck. Sterling laughed, a booming sound that filled the room. He did not seem offended. "Animals never like the hardware," he said, tapping the metal leg with a cane. "It smells like a machine, not a man." Jake laid the printed topography maps on the desk. "We know where the lost Confederate train is buried. It is on your land, in the blind spot of the Diablo Canyon." Sterling studied the maps, his eyes narrowing. He traced the lines with a thick finger. "I have owned this land for 20 years. I have drilled every inch. There is nothing there." "The entrance is collapsed," Leo spoke up, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "You cannot see it from the surface. You need the seismic data I decoded." Sterling looked at the 17-year-old. He looked at the laptop Leo was holding. Then a slow grin spread across his face. He walked around the desk and clapped a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder. The boy flinched slightly, then straightened. "You have a sharp eye, son," Sterling said, his voice warm and charismatic. "Most men look at the desert and see dirt. You looked and saw the history beneath it. You have the eyes of a conqueror." Leo felt a flush of pride. Jake rarely gave compliments. His father was a man of silence and survival. Sterling, however, radiated a powerful, confident authority that Leo found instantly magnetic. "I will provide the trucks, the excavation gear, and the security," Sterling said, looking at Jake. "But I take 50%. Jake hesitated. He did not like the man's eyes. They were too hungry. But he looked at Leo, and he looked at their empty bank account. "We have a deal," Jake said. "Excellent," Sterling beamed. He turned back to Leo. "Come with me, kid. Let me show you the modified Humvees we will be taking. You ever shoot a high-caliber hunting rifle?" "I have not," Leo admitted. "Well," Sterling said, guiding the boy toward the door, ignoring Jake and the growling dog. "Today you learn. The desert does not forgive the unarmed." The convoy of 3 modified tactical trucks cut a dusty path deep into the desolate heart of the Big Bend wilderness. The landscape was a brutal expanse of red rock and heat shimmer, a place where civilization felt like a distant memory. Leo sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. For hours he had listened to Cyrus Sterling spin tales of the Old West, of fortunes made and lost by men with the will to seize them. Sterling drove with a casual confidence, his titanium prosthetic leg working the pedals with mechanical precision. He spoke to the 17-year-old not as a child, but as an apprentice, feeding Leo's hunger for respect. Far behind them, in the third vehicle, Jake sat in silence, squeezed between 2 of Sterling's mercenaries. He watched the dust cloud from his son's truck ahead, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Beside him, Wolf was restless. The 7-year-old German shepherd paced the small metal floor, his ears pinned back, his amber eyes fixed on the lead vehicle. The dog let out a low, continuous whine that the soldiers ignored, but Jake knew that sound. It was not fear. It was a warning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of bruised purple and blood orange, Sterling signaled for the convoy to halt for the night. They set up a perimeter camp near a dry riverbed. Sterling sat by the fire, carving a piece of expensive steak with a hunting knife. He tossed a raw chunk toward Wolf, who was tethered near the rear tire of the command truck. "Eat up, killer!" Sterling called out with a grin. Wolf did not move toward the meat. Instead, the sable-coated dog lowered his head, his lip curling to reveal white teeth. A deep, vibrating growl rumbled in his chest, directed solely at the man with the metal leg. Leo, embarrassed by the dog's aggression toward their host, walked over. "Wolf, stop it!" he hissed, reaching for the dog's collar. Wolf ignored him. The dog turned and began to dig frantically at the base of the truck's massive off-road tire, kicking up clouds of sand and loose gravel. "Wolf, knock it off," Leo commanded, grabbing the dog's harness. "You are acting crazy." Wolf stopped, panting, his nose nudging the object he had unearthed from the shallow sand. Leo looked down, expecting to see a bone or a rock. It was a leather wallet. It was scorched along the edges and stained with dark, dried blood. Leo frowned and picked it up. His fingers brushed the embossed initials on the cover. He froze. He opened it, and the driver's license inside confirmed the impossible. It belonged to the stranger who had died at their gas station, the man who had given him the map. Leo looked at the fresh dirt on Sterling's tires. He looked at the shovel strapped to the side of the truck. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Sterling was not a stranger. He had not just met them. He had been hunting the man with the map. He had killed him. Leo looked up across the fire. Sterling was watching him, the charismatic smile gone, replaced by a cold, predatory assessment. Samuel tended to the gash on Jake's shoulder with practiced efficiency. His movements were calm, his weathered face showing no judgment, only a deep, quiet focus. Jake sat rigid in the simple hogan, his own worn canvas jacket folded nearby. Wolf lay by the door, his silver and gray body exhausted, but his head raised. He watched every move Samuel made, his protective instinct warring with the old man's peaceful demeanor. Finally, Samuel finished the bandage. He held the small broken fragment of the sun key in his palm. "You are not the first to come here seeking the Howling Canyon," Samuel said, his voice low. "But you are the first to carry her burden." "Her?" Jake asked, his voice rough. "The scientist, the one who understood the land, the mother of your son, Leo." Jake's head snapped up. "You knew Alara?" "She worked with us," Samuel explained, rising. "She came here a decade ago, tracking the same seismic anomalies that Elias hunts. But she was different. He sees a weapon. She saw a catastrophe." Samuel led Jake out of the hogan, with Wolf following close at Jake's heel. They walked to a sacred kiva, a round ceremonial room built deep into the red earth. Inside, the air was cool and still. Samuel walked to a small alcove. She knew Elias was obsessed, that he was turning the organization toward her research. She knew he would never stop. She built the key, but she also built a warning. She entrusted this part to us. He revealed a small, strange device, a mix of modern circuitry and ancient turquoise stone. It had a slot that perfectly matched the broken fragment Jake carried. Samuel slid the two pieces together. A low electronic humming sound filled the kiva. A beam of light shot from the device, projecting a flickering, holographic image onto the smooth stone wall. It was Alara. Jake stopped breathing. It was her, exactly as he remembered, in her late 20s with intelligent, dark, observant eyes, Leo's eyes, and a kind, determined face. Wolf, sensing the profound, sudden shift in Jake's emotions, moved to his side and pressed his heavy body against Jake's leg, letting out a soft, questioning whine. Alara's image flickered, her voice filling the chamber. "Jake," she began, her voice strained, "if you are seeing this, it means Elias has found the key, and it means I am gone." Jake shut his eyes, the pain of a decade hitting him at once. "Listen to me," she continued, her scientist's urgency taking over. "The Howling Canyon is not a weapon to be aimed. It is a prison, a volatile geothermal fault line that our ancestors managed to seal. Elias believes he can control it. He is wrong. He will unleash a disaster that will wipe this entire region off the map." She held up a complete sun key in the recording. "I built this not to open the kiva, Jake. I built it to seal the final fracture. Elias never understood. He thinks it's a trigger." Her face softened, the image wavering as tears filled her eyes. "I know you're running, Jake. I always knew, but we have a son. His name is Leo. I've hidden him. Please, if you found him, protect our son. He is your blood. Don't let Elias finish what I died trying to stop." The hologram sputtered and vanished, plunging the kiva back into silence. Jake stood motionless, his grief now forged into a cold, unbreakable purpose. This was no longer just a rescue. It was Alara's final request. Alara's voice, a ghost in the stone kiva, had ignited a fire in Jake. The grief was still there, a cold, hard knot in his chest, but now it was eclipsed by a razor-sharp, protective rage. He was no longer just a man running. He was a father fulfilling a promise. Samuel, the older Navajo guardian, moved with an urgency that belied his age. He pulled supplies from a hidden cache and pointed toward the towering red cliffs. Elias thought he knew the path, Samuel explained, but Alara and his people had mapped a different way. A harder way, a faster way. They set off at a grueling pace, leaving the sanctuary of the Kiva. Wolf ranged ahead. The 5-year-old German shepherd seemed to understand the shift in Jake. His magnificent silver and gray body moved with a hunter's focus, navigating the treacherous terrain with ease. They climbed not over the main trails, but up sheer, treacherous rock faces and through narrow slot canyons that were barely visible to the untrained eye. Jake, in his worn dark brown canvas jacket and durable blue jeans, moved like a mountain goat, his years of survival training kicking in. Hours later, Samuel held up a hand, signaling them to stop. They were on a high ridge overlooking a wide, dusty basin. Far below, Elias's convoy of tactical vehicles was moving slowly. Samuel whispered that Elias had placed sentries ahead. Jake scanned the ridge opposite them, but saw nothing. Wolf, standing beside Jake, suddenly went stiff. His head turned and his ears locked forward, pointing not at the convoy, but at a cluster of boulders 100 yards to their left. The dog let out a single, almost silent release of air through his nose, a clear warning. Jake and Samuel followed the dog's gaze. 2 of Elias's men, dressed in tan tactical gear, were crouched in the rocks, watching the pass below. They were blocking the only safe route. Jake whispered that they could not get by unseen. Samuel shook his head. They did not need to fight. He pointed up at a loose shale deposit balanced precariously above a different empty section of the canyon. They just needed to make noise. Working together, they used a sturdy branch as a lever, pushing against the largest support rock. With a deep groan of shifting earth, the shale gave way. A cascade of rocks, large and small, thundered down the opposite canyon wall, a loud, crashing sound that echoed like a landslide. The 2 sentries immediately scrambled, moving to investigate the sound, believing Jake's group was trying to outflank them from the other direction. The path was clear. Meanwhile, in the lead vehicle of the convoy, Leo sat across from Elias. The 15-year-old teenager wore a dark gray hoodie, his face pale, but his jaw set in a line of defiance. He was no longer the scared child of the past. He was a young man who had inherited his mother's sharp mind. Elias was looking at a rugged laptop, tracking the energy readings from the sun key. He muttered that they were close, praising Alara's genius while mocking her intent. Leo felt a cold knot of anger. He looked at the equipment. He shifted, his lean body stumbling as the truck hit a bump. It looked accidental, but it was calculated. His hand knocked an open plastic water bottle on the console. Water splashed across the laptop keyboard and the attached GPS unit. The screen hissed, sputtered, and went black with a sharp static pop of short-circuiting electronics. Elias roared in frustration, grabbing the useless wet equipment. He ordered the convoy to stop immediately to switch to backup technology. High above on the ridge, Jake and Samuel watched the vehicles below grind to a halt. The diversion had worked, both theirs and Leo's. They were gaining time. The shortcut had worked. Jake, Samuel, and Wolf reached the high ridge overlooking the Howling Canyon just as the convoy rolled to a stop below. The canyon was a deep, circular basin ending in a sheer wall of rock. At its center sat a large, sealed kiva. "He is too late," Samuel whispered, relief in his voice. "He cannot open it without the key." "He has Leo," Jake said, his voice flat and cold. They watched in horror as Elias dragged the 15-year-old boy from the truck. Leo stumbled, but tried to pull away. He was lean and strong, but he was no match for the trained mercenary who shoved him toward the stone door. Elias held the complete sun key, now repaired. "Place it in the center," Elias commanded, his voice echoing in the basin. "No, Leo, do not do it," Jake roared from the ridge, exposing his position. Elias looked up, his face a mask of triumph. He did not fire. He simply pressed his handgun against Leo's side. "Do it, boy, or your father dies failing to save you, just as he failed your mother." Leo, trembling, looked up at his father on the ridge. He saw the desperation in Jake's eyes. With no choice, the teenager turned and pressed the sun key into the ancient lock. The sound was not a click. It was a low, deep rumble that vibrated through the soles of their boots. The kiva door did not open. Instead, a massive fissure cracked open in the canyon floor, splitting the earth. A pressurized, deafening sound like 1,000 jets erupted from the ground. A colossal vortex of superheated steam, sand, and blue lightning burst from the fissure, tearing a hole in the sky. The ground heaved violently. "It is here!" Elias screamed, his arms outstretched, his face lit by the unholy light. He laughed, a high, thin sound. "Paradise. Ilara, you fool! You tried to lock it, but you just built me the key." He walked toward the vortex, holding a device, trying to control the chaotic energy. "Elias, it is unstable," Jake yelled, sliding down the loose scree of the slope. The whirlwind seemed to react to the man's arrogance. A single, violent gust of wind broke from the main vortex. It slammed into Elias, lifting the lean zealot off his feet like a dry leaf. He did not even have time to scream. The storm tossed him high against the far canyon wall and flung him into a deep, newly formed fissure. He vanished into the dark depths of the earth. The canyon was destroying itself. Boulders the size of trucks began to fall from the rim. Jake scrambled to the basin floor. "Leo?" He ran through the swirling dust, grabbed his son by the hoodie, and pulled him away from the platform just as it collapsed into the widening hole. "Jake, this way!" Samuel yelled, waving from the canyon wall. A secondary tremor hit, and a wall of rock collapsed, burying the convoy. The air instantly filled with a thick, choking dust, plunging the world into a blind, roaring darkness. "Samuel," Jake yelled, holding his coughing son, "I cannot see." "The tunnel of the ancestors is here," Samuel's voice called out, close but invisible. "I cannot find the entrance. We are blind." Jake squeezed his eyes shut against the grit. Leo was gripping his arm, terrified. The ground shook beneath them. "Wolf," Jake commanded, his voice breaking. "Find him! Find Samuel! Lead!" Wolf was terrified. The noise was deafening, the ground unstable. But he heard his master's command. He dropped his magnificent silver and gray head. He ignored the chaos and focused on his nose. He smelled the dust, the sulfur, and the sharp ozone of the lightning. But beneath that, he smelled the two scents he trusted: Jake and Samuel. The dog gave a sharp, loud bark. He pushed through the blinding dust, his nose tracking the faint scent of cool, fresh air cutting through the stagnation. "He is here!" Samuel cried out as the dog bumped into his legs. Jake, holding Leo, stumbled toward the bark. He grabbed Samuel's arm. "I have you! Wolf, lead! Find the air!" Wolf, now with his pack connected behind him, focused on the one thing that was different. Amidst the choking dust, he smelled a tiny, clear stream of clean air. The tunnel. He barked again and ran toward it. Jake, holding Leo and dragging Samuel, followed the sound of the German shepherd. They dove into a narrow, dark crevice just as the entire howling canyon collapsed inward, sealing the roaring, chaotic energy forever. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on, but letting go. Jake had the power to change the past, but he realized that his true world was the sun standing beside him. If this story about choosing the future over the past touched your heart, please like this video and share your thoughts below. Your support helps our journey continue. We invite you to subscribe, because the adventure isn't over. The next chapter is waiting for you on the screen.